Nana Shastra Vicharanaika Nipuno Saddharma Samstapako Lokanam Hitakarino Tribhuvane Manyo Saranyakaro Radha Krishna Padaravinda Bhajana Nandena Mataliko Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyugo Shri Jiva Gopalako Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghuyugo Shri Jiva Gopalako. In the translation, I offer my respectful obeisances unto the six Goswamis, namely Shri Rupa Goswami, Shri Sanatan Goswami, Shri Raghunath Bhatta Goswami, Shri Raghunath Das Goswami, Shri Jiva Goswami, and Shri Gopal Bhatta Goswami, who are very expert in scrutinizingly studying all the revealed scriptures with the aim of establishing eternal religious principles for the benefit of all human beings. Thus they are honored all over the three worlds, and they are worth taking shelter of, because they are absorbed in the mood of the gopis and are engaged in the transcendental loving service of Radha and Krishna. Now Srila Rupa Goswami pronouns Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Jena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam. When will Srila Rupa Goswami, who was established within this material world, the mission to fulfill the desire of Lord Chaitanya, give me shelter and under his lotus feet? So everyone can say it together with me. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we shall read from the Nectar of Instruction, text number 2, which we are continuing today. So everyone can read together with me the verse. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha lolyamcha sadbid bhakti vinasyati. And the translation by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhakti Brhat Swami Srila Prabhupada. One's devotional service is spoiled when he becomes too entangled in the following 6 activities. 1. Eating more than necessary or collecting more funds than required. 2. 2. Over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. 3. Talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. 4. Practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement. Or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. 5. Associating with worldly-minded persons who are not interested in Krishna consciousness. And 6, being greedy for mundane achievements. Excuse me. Pamajnana timirandasya Gyananjana shalakaya Chakshurudmilitam yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Tadati Swapadantikam Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanabhyo Vaishnavabhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So yesterday one question was asked by a Kevala Bhakti Prabhu, who's all the way from Toronto. And the question was in relation to, having a lot of, you could say, wealth or artificial wealth in the bank and so forth. And also he talked about, living comfortably in the material world, like, big apartments and so forth, and big bungalows and so forth like that. And we were talking about also, driving expensive cars and things like that. So somehow today, when I was reading to some other texts, in the Nectar of Instruction, I came across something that Srila Prabhupada answers in relation to Kevala Bhakti's question yesterday. And this actually helps us on the basis of what we discussed yesterday. Krishna consciousness is actually, plain living and high thinking, not plainly thinking and high living. So this takes us to actually text number 10 in the book. If you want to get to it, I'm just reading from that. Excuse me. Excuse me. So in text number 10, in paragraph 1, it starts at the present moment. And that paragraph is about a page, just over a page. And then in paragraph number 2, it begins with the point, this is the position of all karmis. And that paragraph is quite lengthy. It's quite lengthy. In other words, it's just over 2 pages, actually. And then paragraph 3 begins with the words, one should therefore be eager to understand the science of the soul. Now, before the beginning of paragraph 3, if you go, quite a number of lines into paragraph 2, practically almost like half the page up, and it will begin with the words, the purpose of human life is. If you found it, I'm going to read on now. The purpose of human life is to get out of the threefold miserable conditions, which we discussed also, Adidevik, Adi-Atmik, and Adibhautik yesterday. The purpose of human life is to get out of the threefold miserable conditions, which are concomitant with material existence. Unfortunately, fruitive workers are mad to earn money and acquire temporary material comforts by all means. Therefore, they risk being degraded to lower species of life. Materialists foolishly make many plans to become happy in this material world. They do not stop to consider that they will live only for a certain number of years, out of which they must spend the major portion acquiring money for sense gratification. Ultimately, such activities end in death. Materialists do not consider that after giving up the body, they may become embodied as lower animals, plants, or trees. Thus, all the activities simply defeat the purpose of life. Not only are they born ignorant, but they act on the platform of ignorance, thinking that they are getting material comforts in the shape of skyscraper buildings, big cars, honorable positions, and so on. The materialists do not know that in the next life they will be degraded and that all the activities simply serve as parabha, their defeat. This is the verdict of Srimad Bhagavata, 5th canto, chapter 5, text 5. Para bhavas dhavad abodha jataha. So he was talking about skyscraper buildings and big cars and living opulently in the material world yesterday in relation to Kevala Bhakti's question. So I thought I'll just read that for today. Prabhupada very precisely, supports the answer to that question to Kevala Bhakti from yesterday. And now we have covered text number 1 is how to recognize a bona fide spiritual master or a qualified spiritual master. And yesterday in text number 2, we have covered, which indicates how to prevent a spiritual fall down. And we covered atyahara and prayasa. Atyahara indicating, as Prabhupada says in the translation itself, that eating more than necessary and collecting more funds than required. And prayasa, atyahara leads to prayasa, which means over-endeavoring for mundane things that are very difficult to obtain. So atyahara, prayasascha, and today we're continuing with prajalpa. In other words, excuse me once again. Hare Krishna. So prajalpa, you can put slides 27 onto the screen and Prabhupada gives it quite nicely. Yes, this is slide 27. It's also in your slide notes. So prajalpa means talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. That is actually in the translation. And Srila Prabhupada says in paragraph 12 in the purport, those outside of the Krishna consciousness movement are interested in reading heaps of newspapers, magazines, and novels, solving crossword puzzles and doing many other nonsensical things. In this fashion, people simply waste their valuable time and energy. In the Western countries, old men, they're retired from active life. They play cards, they fish, they watch television, and they debate about, useless social political schemes. So here Prabhupada is giving many examples of unnecessary mundane talks, which is called prajalpa. You can put me back onto the screen. Now, of course, Srila Prabhupada gave that examples of those things when he was translating and giving his purports to this text number 2 in Nectar of Instruction. Yeah. But we also know nowadays it's not just reading newspapers and watching television and playing cards and other things. Now everyone has all sorts of other types of kind of activities that are just wasting time in terms of prajalpa. Yeah. And nowadays, Prajalpa indicates, don't just speak about, politics or, fishing or playing cards and watching television. They speak mainly about sense gratification. Sense gratification, which is actually the most common form of prajalpa. So in other words, prajalpa in its ordinary form, in English, the word is called gossiping. People get together and just gossip. That's in its ordinary form. But the most intense form of prajalpa, or you could say the bad form of prajalpa, is to actually blaspheme and criticize devotees. So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur rather, in his Harinam Chintamani, he explains that there's four ways of, usually in a broad sense, that one criticizes or blasphemes devotees. So one will criticize a devotee on account of his birth, and maybe criticize him for his past sinful activities before he came to Krishna consciousness. And they may also criticize for some traces of some present activities, which he is already slowly becoming purified from. Or they may even criticize that he doesn't have any good qualities yet, or she doesn't have any good qualities yet. So this is not the basis for criticizing devotees. It should not be like that. Now, Prajalpa indicates that if you are aware of a fault in a devotee, that may not necessarily be offensive. But what is offensive in relation to seeing faults is the mentality of just finding fault for nothing, without any constructive end to help the devotee. So we should know that Krishna, he is offended more when we offend a devotee, rather than we offending Krishna himself. But it's not that we should offend Krishna at the same time, the devotees. So sometimes it is given as an example that that the heat on the head, if you put heat on the head, it is not felt so much as you administer heat to the feet. When you administer heat to the feet, it is far more painful. So similarly, when one offends devotees in the form of prajalpa, which is actually the worst form, one is actually offending or just burning at Krishna's lotus feet, creating pain to Krishna's lotus feet in that way. So now how to avoid this kind of prajalpa? Srila Prabhupada says in one sentence very beautifully, and that's the next slide, slide 28. Put it onto the screen. Just in one sentence in paragraph 12, Srila Prabhupada says how to avoid prajalpa. If we must talk, we should talk about the Krishna consciousness movement. In other words, Srila Prabhupada, put me back onto the screen. Srila Prabhupada said that the BBT, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, is my heart, and ISKCON is my body, and the monies collected from the book distribution is my blood. So in other words, the Bhaktivedanta Book Trust, which actually, publishes and prints books for us, and the money that is collected from distributing the books by the devotees in ISKCON sandwiches ISKCON itself as Prabhupada's body. The BBT is my heart, ISKCON is my body, and the money is collected from book distribution is my blood. That means it's his very life. Yeah. So if we must talk, then we should talk about the Krishna consciousness movement positively. In other words, when it says the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, it indicates that the favorable association of devotees and the favorable association of non-devotees by offering them the valuable eternal gift of the wealth of Krishna consciousness. And we have to talk about the Krishna consciousness movement, then we also have to talk about how to improve our chanting of the holy names, especially japa. And how do we talk about the Krishna consciousness movement? This will be nicely further described in text number 3 and text number 4 of such activities in relation to the Krishna consciousness movement. All right, so we have covered to some extent prajalpa, which means talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. So I may take some questions or comments now on this particular point if you would like to ask now. Before we go on to niyamagraha and jana sangastalolyam cha. Anyone about prajalpa?
So far, no one is asking Maharaj. Okay, there's one devotee. Hare Krishna, you can come to the screen.
Because it's nice for me to take questions as we move along. Otherwise, then we keep to that particular subject in terms of explanation and overcoming doubts. What's the name of the devotee?
Shema.
Shema, can you unmute yourself and start speaking and come onto the screen?
Hare Krishna Maharaj.
Oh, Sita Thakurani, okay. Tell me.
So, when we have difference of opinions with the seniors,
Yes.
and then when we discuss it with our contemporaries,
Yes.
is this a prajalpa?
See, the discussion is not so important. That we should be doing. But the subject of the discussion is important. In other words, Prajalpa indicates that, we are talking about things that does not really help us, ourselves personally, to advance in consciousness. But if you're discussing something about seniors, you rather discuss with another senior devotee to discuss with the senior. Just leave it to them. Okay? But if you're discussing about a senior in relation to yourself, then you take help of another senior to talk to that senior. And the best way to talk to the other senior would be in your own presence to clarify immediately. But if you say the other senior to talk to the other senior that is in relation to you, in relation to Krishna consciousness, then that senior may say otherwise, but if it's in your presence, then you can immediately clarify. And clarification is actually important in relationship to association of devotees, positive association of devotees. Because if you do not clarify, you may carry that negatively in your consciousness unnecessarily. So as soon as you can clarify in an appropriate time, place, and circumstance and consciousness of the other person, it would be better because we have to become peaceful. And when we are peaceful, then we can also peacefully chant our japa, especially, and peacefully also, in the positive sense, associate with the devotees. Sita Thakurani, is that all right for now?
Yes.
All right. Are there any other questions about Prajalpa, or we can move along?
Taravali Mataji has a question.
Unmute yourself and please come onto the screen.
You can speak, Mataji.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, please accept my obeisances. It goes to Srila Prabhupada.
Okay, Tarabali, tell me.
So I had two questions, kind of related to each other about Prajalpa. If one is it bad that we ask devotees like what's going on in their lives, about the work or studies? Like, is that Prajalpa? Like,
There are two things. One is prescribed duties, and the other is the absolute nature of Krishna consciousness. See? So within prescribed duties, out of a positive relationship and affection for family, friends, and relatives, one may inquire about the well-being. And that is actually quite appropriate, to inquire with other person's well-being. In fact, the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, one of them is our Srila Rupa Goswami here with Nectar of Instruction. And when they used to travel around in Braj Mandala, so when they visit families, or families invite them to their home for some, you could say, freshly made rot. Rot is like a thick chapati, very tasty, coming out of, it's like a bigger version of a thick chapati that's actually cooked over a fire that's made out of cow dung. It's very tasty. So the 6 Goswamis, they used to be invited to the Vrajabasi's homes, simple homes made of mud walls and thatched roof and so forth. So when they used to enter into the home, the first things the 6 Goswamis, or one of the Goswamis in a particular home, they used to ask, so how is the family members? You know? And I see you have a daughter of marriageable age. Is she not married yet? You know? How is the health, of the elders especially? And they used to also inquire about the cows, especially the calves which were in the inner courtyard. Because cows and calves are part of members of the family. See? The cows and the bulls are like the elder children, and the calves are like the younger children. On the basis of their own children, they used to take care of them. So sometimes the 6 Goswamis, they used to wander around, Braj Mandala, wandering in the sense that they always are remembering the pastimes of Radha and Krishna in that particular place. Sometimes they used to walk around the agricultural fields of the Vaishyas. Nanda Maharaj was the Vaishya, and the Brijvasis are mainly Vaishyas, farmers and so forth. So they'll meet a farmer, and the farmer will immediately come and say Baba, and offer his pranams and offer obeisances. And then this one of the Goswamis used to ask, so how is the crops doing? They were concerned not only about the human being, they were concerned about how's the crops doing. Is there enough for everyone to eat, during harvesting time, and so forth. So this is like a transcendental prescribed duty. We are not like impersonal, because we do live in this world, and we have to, take care of the body, both subtle and gross. That means free from mental disease and free from, physical needs, for the body, nourishment of the body. So that is quite appropriate if you are inquiring about, the well-being, both materially, basic needs, both materially, the well-being and the spiritual well-being of one's, friends, relatives, and family members. And for that matter also, even if the other family members and friends, are not really practicing devotees, one can be nice to them and inquire about them. And they actually feel it. They'll feel it, this person really cares for me. This person really cares. Not that we're doing it for them to feel that. It's a natural state for one devotee to do that. But we should not get involved in like the mundane stuff, did you hear she's divorced now? Or did you hear that, you know, that, the eldest son of this devotee family is taking drugs and so forth. If that's your like kind of, talk, it's like finding faults, but not with the mentality of trying to help. You can sense that, now she's become like a single mother after the divorce. So you can help her because there's a divorce. See? But not that you just talk about, oh, she deserves it, that's a karma coming back to how she treated her husband and all that stuff. See? And similarly, if you talk about other type of examples in relation to friends and family members, they're already suffering due to going through that, whether the eldest son is taking drugs, or whether there's a separation in the family, or whether somebody lost a job, they're already suffering. But if you appease their suffering, if you take away their misery by helping them, that's his affection. So that's not in the category of prajalpa. But just speaking about the fallen situation and so forth, and not really trying to help, that is really, you could say in one sense, is actually tantamount to like Vaishnava Parada, offending devotees. Taravali, is that okay?
Yes, Marge. Thank you so much.
All right. So how's Revati and Asuya? I heard a little bit in the background.
Yeah, she's doing great. She's growing up fast.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Any other questions on this point, Prajalpa? Anyone else?
Marge, is it okay if I the second part? Sorry.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
We live in a world that is often charged with like lots of political issues and things like that. And is it okay to discuss these things with devotees, or we should just be kind of ignoring these issues and not knowing what's happening and just kind of not talking about this then?
All right, thank you. Good practical question. I'll answer it in my own personal experience. We need to know what's happening in the world. Otherwise, we're going into some place that's actually not good. Like, for example, once I was in Toronto, and in about like 2 days' time, I was to take a flight from Toronto to Mexico City. See? And usually those type of flights, they fly over the Gulf of Mexico into Mexico City. So I was preparing, 2 days before to like wind up my services in Toronto and then leave. Then suddenly one devotee called me and he said, Maharaj, I think that time I may have been a brahmachari. He said, Prabhu, you need to see this. So I was visiting him for, like lunch prasadam and seeing the family members. His name is Vaishnav Prabhu. So he told me, Prabhu, you got to see what's happening here. So on the television, there was this Hurricane Katrina, you may know, Hurricane Katrina. And Air Canada at that time, they were like taking a route that was going to the west coast and avoiding the, that basin of that ocean, and then landing up in Mexico City. So immediately he told me that you should find out, because that hurricane is going towards the western side, in the Mexican basin. Then I postponed my trip until that hurricane was over, because it was moving, but it didn't really affect Mexico at that time, but I couldn't take that risk. So, like, I meant to be going to India with my ticket, or alternatively, I bought another ticket to go back to South Africa. then, like devotees will look at the news, and because I don't get time to look at it. So they just tell me in a summarized form, because they look at it in more detail. So they tell me, this COVID-19 thing is really causing havoc in Delhi or in South Africa. They open the thing up and they can't control the thing and so forth like that. So better you stay put in Mauritius, like that. So we need to know what's happening. We need to know what's happening politically, and we need to know what's happening socially. Especially for me, I need to know what's happening before I could start traveling in the next country. So these things are practical. They are practical. When Srila Prabhupada came to Mauritius, when he landed in Mauritius, he could identify how this can become the first Krishna conscious country immediately on the very first day. And in the next morning, Srila Prabhupada said, bring me all the newspapers. See? And we know the most striking news for the day would be on the front page. So the newspapers come in two languages here. It comes in English and it comes in French. Because it was, Île Maurice means in French, Mauritius Island. So Srila Prabhupada couldn't understand French, so he called one local person and he said, can you tell me what's happening in the headlines? So Srila Prabhupada, within you could say, 30 minutes or so, he saw these various newspapers and he knew what was happening in the country. Just by the headlines and reading some. And there's some photos of Srila Prabhupada actually, reading the newspaper. But it wasn't for long, just 30 minutes, 45 minutes, just knowing what's happening in the country so that he could direct his lectures and preaching in relationship to that and on a practical level, help the people in that way. So, these things are there, but you could say in one sense, this prajalpa, you could, if you look at it very carefully, Prabhupada translated it as talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. So it's not that one should not know what's happening, but if it's necessary, not unnecessarily, then it's fine. So therefore, Prabhupada uses the word talking unnecessarily about mundane subject matters. Because if it's necessary, then we should know what's happening, definitely, especially because we are a preaching mission. We're a preaching mission in that. I'll give you one last example. In West Africa, I forget which country. Either it's Cote d'Ivoire or Sierra Leone, but it wasn't Ghana or Nigeria. Some other African country there. Senegal, maybe. I really don't know which one. But His Holiness Bhakti Brhat Swami used to be also our GBC in South Africa as well as for West Africa. So one time he told me when I was the president in Durban, and he was my GBC, he told me that, there was some Prabhupada disciples who liked the adventure of preaching in Africa. But in that particular country, the rebels, so-called rebels, maybe they were right, I don't know. They were trying to take over the country because they're not satisfied with the current regime. And there was a lot of infighting, and the rebels were getting stronger. So some of the devotees decided that they should be on the side of the rebels so that they could get some inroads to preach in that particular. But then the devotees from the other countries, the local African body devotees from the neighbors of this particular country, told them, don't go. Don't go. I said, what is wrong? Krishna consciousness is absolute. We have Nishingadev on our side. Don't go. But they made that mistake. Where they went in and some of them were actually killed by the rebels who they thought were their friends. So, we should not unnecessarily take risks, but we should know what's happening in the country. That's not mundane. That's not mundane, because we should protect this body which belongs to Krishna to engage it in the circumstances of giving Krishna consciousness favor. Of course, risks are there, but in other ways. But if you know there's this genuine risk, that you may lose your life, one I should be careful. So one should know what's happening, even in different countries. So these are the few examples that I thought to share with you today. Is that okay?
Yes, thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Somebody else has a question?
There's a devotee named Jyoti Mataji, so she wrote the question in the message she wanted me to read on her behalf.
Read it.
Okay. If we want to speak about Krishna consciousness but the opposite person does not reciprocate in a positive manner, what should be our attitude?
Everyone may have heard the question, right?
Yeah.
I'll repeat it. In other words, just for my understanding to respond to it. So if we want to be speaking about Krishna consciousness, but the other person is sort of leading the conversation to mundane subject matters, what should we do? Is that the gist of the question, Krishna Prema Pradayaka Prabhu? Is that the question?
Yes, Maharaj.
Okay.
The question says does not reciprocate in a positive manner.
Does not reciprocate in a positive manner.
Yes.
Okay. So basically, we're talking about two persons here. One is the devotee like Jyoti, who asked the question, and the other is another person. Now, it depends. There's no real general answer to this, but it depends on various situations of the consciousness of the other person. So the other person may be a devotee. The other person may not be a devotee. The other person may be suffering as a devotee. See? So sometimes to hear the other person as a pre-step, to hear them, means that that other person will develop more faith in you to hear you. In other words, so you can give the positive answer and bring them out from the negative consciousness to the positive consciousness. Or sometimes the other person that is speaking to you, they may know you, not so well, and you may know them not so well. So in that sense, you can tell them, look, I prefer not to discuss this and close it. And you won't offend the person because, you don't know them so well. But if there's a very close relationship between you and the other person who's like a little negative in there, talks about, which is not helping one's Krishna consciousness, then they may be speaking to you as a friend. Now, you cannot cut them off because you are to maintain the friendship for their benefit to be helped to actually become positive in the future. So it all depends on the relationship with the other person. Sometimes, even as a sannyasi, I may not even know that person. I may be visiting some temple, and this is a new person I haven't met before, and they may come and actually, be very critical about the devotees also. See? Now, as a sannyasi, I may hear them, and after they speak, they are ready to hear me. See? And I can cut through. I can cut. I can cut through their negativity about devotees, and they'll be hearing. They'll be hearing. Although they may not know me well, but they are respecting the ashram of sannyas. So sometimes we can use the ashram of sannyas, or we can use the seniority, like you may be senior to the other person, to actually cut through and help them. Everyone needs help in various ways. But if you feel that the other person is becoming so mundane in their talk, which is prajalpa towards you, and it's negative, then you may have to save yourself. You may have to immediately say, look, and I don't want to hear this anymore. It's affecting my consciousness, and you should tell the person to stop. And if you don't want to stop, you politely offer obeisances to them and walk away, if they're devotees. So it's just various situations with different types of persons that you may be interacting with. And accordingly, you should, do the needful at that time. And if you do not know what to do, Krishna will help you. Tesham satata yuktanam bhajate priti purvakam tadami buddhi yoga yena mamupayanti. And Krishna will help. If you're sincere, Krishna will help you not to become part of hearing blasphemy or negative things or mundane talks like Prajal. Tadami buddhi yoga. In other words, Krishna will give you the necessary common sense and intelligence to come out of it because of your sincerity. Is Jyoti, is that okay for now?
She replied, "Thank you, Maharaj."
Okay. Are there any other questions in relation to
There's
Prajal?
one more, Anjana Gopika Mataji.
Okay, Anjana Gopika, come into the screen.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna, how are you?
Good Maharaj.
How's
Maharaj,
your,
I have a
how's your two children, girls doing?
yeah,
Okay, good. Tell me a
uh,
question.
yeah, as per this question, over endeavor, we do not means we don't supposed to over endeavor for the material things. But what about the spiritual things? Is it okay with over endeavor for the devotional service?
I'm trying to catch your words, so you should speak slowly and speak a little bit softly, and it become clear. So ask me your question again.
What about for the spiritual things, Maharaj?
What does it mean by spiritual things? Is that your question?
What about, is it okay to over endeavor in devotional service?
Oh, that's a nice question. Okay. All right. In other words, she's talking about, prayasa, over endeavor, but in relation to Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada said that first health, then sadhana, and then service. In other words, one should take care of the body and the mind. That means one has to be, you could say, sound in one's mental equilibrium. Must be like good mentally also, as well as physically, the gross body good. Take care of your health. Now, if you cannot take care of your health properly, then it will impact on your sadhana because you're overworking or over endeavoring in devotional service. Of course, sometimes there may be a marathon that we have to get things done, like maybe for a temple opening, or we have to sort out things for our Griya Pravesh as soon as possible because, the senior devotees are coming to do kirtan and so forth. So that may be a little different. That's sometimes. But if you always over endeavor in practical devotional service at the expense of your sadhana and at the expense of your mental and physical health, that is really not the right thing to do on a practical level. So therefore it is important to have reasonably sound good health. Of course, there may be some like chronic ailments or chronic diseases that one has to handle and then move on. That's different. See? But health is important and good sadhana is important, which will determine our consciousness of how we do our practical devotional service. See? In our own example as sannyasis, sometimes people think that we are Superman, like from one program to another, from one engagement to another, But, and sometimes devotees, they may not be, you could say, considerate. So we should be considerate with everyone, including considerate with ourselves. So that's not a form of prayasa. That's not really an over endeavor. That's not what we're talking about here. It doesn't fit in that category of prayasa. Your question is exclusively on the basis of, pure devotional service. So it's a little different in that way. All right. Any other questions?
No, Maharaj, that's all
Thank you,
for
Maharaj.
now.
Okay. So now I'm moving on to slide number 29. You can put it onto the screen. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha. Now we're at niyamagraha. So the translation, Srila Prabhupada says, niyamagraha means practicing the scriptural rules and regulations only for the sake of following them and not for the sake of spiritual advancement, or rejecting the rules and regulations of the scriptures and working independently or whimsically. So I've broken down some words of this word niyamagra. Niyama means, it's on the screen, rules and regulations. And agraha, there's a diacritic dash or mark over the A. So it's pronounced long, agraha, eagerness to accept. And then agraha, short A, failure to accept. So if you add this word niyama and to agraha, then you get one word, niyamagraha. So now we'll discuss on a more practical level. You can put me back onto the screen. So like we said, niyama means rules and regulations. Agraha means, in this sense, in a broad category, to be too attached to rules and regulations. So in other words, niyamagra can indicate that we are following rules and regulations in a fanatical way without understanding the end result or purpose of those rules and regulations. Now, what is the purpose of rules and regulations? The purpose is to practice devotional service, which is called sadhana bhakti. That means, sadhana bhakti means under the direction of the scripture shastra, under the directions of one's devotees that live with you, which is called sadhus or shiksha gurus, and under the direction of the guru, which is the initiating spiritual master. So the shastra, sadhu, and guru. And the goal of following all rules and regulations is to actually come to the point of bhava bhakti, or feeling some ecstatic love for Radha and Krishna. That's the goal. So if we are following rules and regulations not for that goal, that is called niyamagra. And when we attach to particular rules and regulations, not for that goal, that is also niyamagra. At the same time, agraha. Agraha means the eagerness to accept the rules. Agraha means that at the same time we should be careful not to neglect the rules and regulations. Not to neglect. See? So when we neglect the rules and regulations, agraha, and we act independently or whimsically, as Prabhupada says in the translation, they can destroy our devotion in practical devotional service. You may be continuing to serve, but may not be devotionally inclined. So it can destroy bhakti. See? Another feature of niyamagraha is that if you remain on one level internally, not that you put on a show externally, of your practice of devotional service, and you don't advance internally spiritually, like from kanishta to madhyam to uttama, and you're stuck on that basis. See? And you not only be stuck, but you are like comfortable. Nobody will know that I'm not chanting my rounds daily. Nobody will know that I'm doing some mundane things. Nobody is checking on me. So one may become comfortable in some mundane routine, which nobody knows. But actually, the law of a reaction will expose you somehow or the other at one given time. And if you're lucky, if you're exposed in the association of devotees, and then the devotees help you, to further nicely advance on a practical level in devotional service. So do not get stuck on a particular level of internal devotional service. That is also niyamaga. So basically speaking, to follow rules and regulations for material benefit is also that type in terms of niyamagra. Like one may be worshipping the deity. One may be even chanting Hare Krishna on beads. But one may be worshipping the deity to be known as a great pujari. Yeah. That is niyamagra. The goal is not love for Krishna. The goal is I'm seen as a great devotee. Or one may be chanting japa on beads, many, many rounds, just for the basis that people will recognize me as a great devotee. One has to be careful, that is also niyamagra. Or one will follow some rules and regulations within practical devotional service because it's good for my business. That is also niyamagra. One may be doing all these things in devotional service so that one can show the authorities that, look, I'm now fit to become guru. I'm now fit to become GBC. I'm now fit to become the temple president. So that is all niyamagra. The goal is not to become guru or GBC or temple president. Or one may be following the rules and regulations just to attract another person to get married to make on a show, look, I'm a good devotee, what's wrong with me? And after the marriage, the partner realizes this person is really not practicing nicely. So that is called niyamagra too. So these are different kind of examples of it. However, although one may be following the rules and regulations not for the sake of developing bhava bhakti or ecstatic love for Radha and Krishna, but still the process will have effect on them. In other words, you cannot cheat Krishna. If you cheat Krishna in the name of the process of devotional service, Krishna will cheat you. And then after that, when you become purified by Krishna cheating you, then you'll follow the rules and regulations for the genuine reason of developing our love for Radha and Krishna, developing our love for the devotees of Radha and Krishna, and developing our love through compassion by giving love of Krishna in Krishna consciousness to those who are not in Krishna consciousness yet. That means preaching and spreading Krishna consciousness. So now I'll just move a little further with this. There's a principal rule, and that's slide number 30. To come out of this niyamagra, a solution. So get to slide number 30. This is the principal rule. It's the main one. See? There are many rules and regulations guiding a devotee's life. But the purpose, that means of following all these rules and regulations, is to help one to always remember Krishna and never forget him. So how to always remember Krishna and never forget him? Now that's the next part. So we get to slide number 31. Prabhupada simply answers this. How to always remember Krishna and never forget him. So here Srila Prabhupada says, from the Chaitanya Charitamrita, in our Krishna consciousness movement, we have recommended that the neophyte chant at least 16 rounds. This chanting of 16 rounds is absolutely necessary if one wants to remember Krishna and not forget him. Of all the regulative principles, the spiritual master's order to chant at least 16 rounds is most essential. So this is the principal rule of how to apply this. Again, of all the regulative principles, the spiritual master's order to chant at least 16 rounds is most important. Now you will note in this excerpt in the second line, Srila Prabhupada says that this is for neophytes. This is for beginning devotees. But to chant more than 16 rounds is for devotees who are not neophytes. Neophyte at least 16 rounds. So put me back onto the screen. Now yesterday there was a question from a devotee that how to always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. See? And the practical fact is that The devotee asked a question yesterday that what if we go to the office, we are associating with others who are not devotees in relation, to coming up text also, to coming up discussions in text number 2. And I mentioned that, to take rest early on a regular day and to rise early on a regular day is most important. In other words, the solution, or you could say the secret to this, is to take rest early and rise early. There may be like some odd days, which not every day. And that odd days, maybe you may have an early flight, and you're not able to chant your rounds in the morning. Or your health is not good, and you may not be able to chant your rounds in the morning. Or sometimes you may be going through some anxiety, or stress, or depression. But on a regular, normal day, you should take rest early in the evening, and you rise early in the morning and try as best as you can to chant your at least 16 rounds. And that will make you always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna throughout the day. Irrespective whether you are going to the office, irrespective whether you're going to college or university or some other work, or irrespective whether you're at home as a housewife and as a mother to the children during the day, it becomes like an auspicious background where Krishna will always be there for you in your consciousness as a transcendental background, which comes from associating with Radha and Krishna in the morning by chanting one's japa. So therefore, Prabhupada makes this. This is the most essential instruction of the spiritual master, is to chant at least 16 rounds of japa. So when one does that, then one will not fall in the category of niyamagraha. Because whatever one is doing during the day, even following rules and regulations and other aspects of practical devotional service, it is governed by this background or overseeing consciousness of you have chanted your japa, and that will help you to nicely progress in Krishna consciousness and not fall in the category of niyamagraha in terms of following the rules fanatically or following the rules without understanding the purpose of why one is following those rules. So that is important, very, very, very important to overcome this principle of niyamagraha. Okay. You have any questions at this point before I continue with the niyamagraha discussion?
We don't have questions, Maharaj.
All right. So in relation to niyamagraha, that means following the rules and regulations, but not fanatically. Sometimes this is not in the category of niyamagraha. We cannot put it there. But sometimes, not all the time, sometimes we may have to break a rule. We may have to break a lesser rule for the higher rule. So I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. Like, if Jatila and Kutila with Abhimanyu in Jawat, if they ask Srimati Radharani, we didn't see you for several hours, where were you? But we know that Srimati Radharani was with Krishna. But Radharani will say, oh, what do you mean where I was? I was worshipping Surya, the sun god. So Radharani is telling lies, is lying, because she cannot give up her association with Krishna. See? So therefore, she broke a lesser rule by telling a white lie so that she can still maintain a relationship with Krishna and not be banned not to associate with Krishna. See? So that's breaking a lesser rule of telling a white lie for the higher or absolute rule of being Krishna conscious or being with Krishna. So similarly, we have another nice pastime in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, which you may be aware of, but it's nice to go through it ourselves. So it gets to slides 32 and 33. So let's get to slide 32 of how you can break a lesser rule for a higher rule, but not all the time. See? So here, and I'm reading for you. It's a beautiful, you could say, pastime with Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Breaking a lesser rule for a higher rule. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu laid down at the door of the Gambira, and Govinda came there to massage his legs. It was a steady, long-standing rule that Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would lie down to rest after lunch, and Govinda would come to massage his legs. Then Govinda would honor the remnants of food left by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. This time, when the Lord lay down, he occupied the entire doorway. Govinda could not enter the room, and therefore he made the following request. Govinda said, "Kindly turn on one side, let me pass to enter the room." However, the Lord replied, "I don't have the strength to move my body." Govinda made his request again and again, but the Lord replied, "I cannot move my body." Govinda repeatedly requested, "I want to massage your legs." But the Lord said, "Do it or don't do it. It depends upon your mind." Then Govinda spread the Lord's wrapper, chada, over his body, and in this way entered the room by crossing over the Lord. Put me back onto the screen. So Govinda broke one rule. And what is that rule? That one should not step over sacred paraphernalia. It's a rule. In other words, you cannot step over the Bhagavad Gita. You cannot step over prasadam and things like that. Now, what to speak of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu? Govinda put the chada over the Lord's body so that he could enter the room, because the Lord's transcendental limbs or legs were on the inside of the room, so that he could massage the Lord. So he broke that rule. See? So put me back onto that slide. Then Govinda, this is in blue on your screen. Then Govinda spreads the Lord's wrapper over his body, and in this way entered the room by crossing over the Lord. He broke the rule. Govinda massaged the Lord's legs as usual. He pressed the Lord's waist and back very softly, and thus all the Lord's fatigue went away. As Govinda stroked his body, the Lord slept very nicely for about 45 minutes, and then his sleep broke. Next slide. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu saw Govinda sitting by his side, he was somewhat angry. "Why have you been sitting here for so long today?" the Lord asked. "Why didn't you go to take your meal after I fell asleep?" the Lord asked. Govinda replied, "You were lying down, blocking the door. There was no way to go." The Lord asked, "How did you enter the room? Why didn't you go out to take your lunch in the same way?" And Govinda mentally replied to himself. He did not argue with the Lord, mentally replied to himself. "My duty is to serve. Even if I have to commit offenses or go to hell, I would not mind committing hundreds and thousands of offenses for the service of the Lord. But I greatly fear committing even a glimpse of an offense for my own self." Unquote. Thinking in this way, Govinda kept silent. He did not reply to the Lord's inquiry. It was Govinda's practice to go take lunch when the Lord was asleep. On that day, however, seeing the Lord's weariness, Govinda continued massaging his body. There was no way to go. How could he leave? When he thought of crossing over the Lord's body, he considered it a great offense. But he just did that 45 minutes before. These are some of the finer points of etiquette in devotional service. Only one who has received the mercy of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu can understand these principles. The Lord is very interested in manifesting the exalted qualities of his devotees. And that is why he engineered this incident. Chaitanya Charitamrita Antya-lila chapter 10, text 80 to 102. So put me back onto the screen. It's a beautiful pastime. Here we can see that the Lord is teaching us through Govinda, therefore he engineered this incident. We can see that 45 minutes earlier, Govinda crossed over the body of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But 45 minutes later, he didn't cross over to go and take his own prasad. He stayed there. 45 minutes later, after the Lord awoke from the massage. See? And we could see that this 45 minutes later, he followed the rule. He did not break the rule again. See? So how often can we break a lesser rule for a higher rule? You can go to the next slide. Slide 34. Transgressing a lesser rule for a higher rule. From the same incident with Govinda and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada says in the summary of this same chapter, from the character of Govinda, it is to be learned that we may sometimes, how often? Sometimes, not always, sometimes commit offenses for the service of the Lord, but not for our sense gratification. So put me back into the screen. So we cannot always break a lesser rule for a higher rule. We should sometimes break a lesser rule for a higher rule. But the gopis of Vrindavan, they're quite different. We cannot imitate them. See, we cannot imitate them. The gopis of Vrindavan, they broke all moral, social, and ethical codes of behavior just to run to Vamsivat when Krishna played his flute. Some were even feeding their small babies. Some were even, serving their husband's lunch or serving prasad in the evening to their lunch. Some were even, were going to the well with their clay pots to fill it up with water and bring, essentially for the household affairs. As soon as they heard Krishna's flute, and they just left that clay pot, and just ran. Some were even decorating themselves, with this mascara or kajal in their eyes. And they were decorating one eye. See? But as soon as they heard Krishna's flute, they stopped the decoration of the eye and became little, messed up, and the other eye had no mascara. They just left that and they ran to Vamsi. So we're not talking about in that sense. Not talking about in that sense. We cannot imitate the gopis of Vrindavan, of breaking all rules that are ethical, moral, and social in their behavior and running to Krishna. That cannot be imitated. It's like, it's like a devotee mother and a wife, while she's serving the father of the house, some prasad, and she hears the conch shell blowing in the temple of Radha and Krishna. And she just suddenly leaves that and she runs to the arti. What will happen? What will happen? The husband and the father of the house is going to get angry. What you doing? No, I'm running to Krishna. Not like that. Not like that. In the ultimate sense, internally our consciousness should be like that. But externally, we should, responsibly perform our prescribed duties. Responsibly perform our prescribed duties. I'm not just breaking a rule and running off and so forth. Okay. All right. We have some time for some questions, and then I'll kind of wind this up. I can take some questions now, but I can wind this up after taking some questions. We have about 10 minutes or so, because I start on time and I end on time, unless there's like some serious question to complete the discussion. At least all questions are good, but at the same time, there may be some questions that I may have to complete. Anyone? Any questions on Niyamagraha?
Ram Gopinath Prabhu has a question. Prabhu, you can come to
Can
the
you come
screen.
onto the screen?
You can start speaking, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Can you hear Maharaj?
Yes, Ram Gopinath Prabhu, I can hear you. Tell me.
Yeah, Hare Krishna Maharaj. This is
Where are you speaking from? Where's your location? Where are you?
I'm from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Okay, good. Tell us, Ram Gopinath, tell me.
Okay, Maharaj, see, I come across a question from friends. In Mahabharata, why Krishna have to win the battle by playing tricks? So here, can we argue like breaking a lesser rule for higher rule? For
You mean?
example,
You
Karna was attacked when he was not armed.
Yes.
So then, so like especially South Indians have attached, they think Krishna is not fair. So
Krishna is not fair.
in fact, not fair by attacking somebody when he's not armed. You see?
Okay.
So now here, Krishna is what you call we say. Can you argue in the point like he break a lower rule for higher purpose?
Okay. Nice question. See, we are discussing breaking a lesser rule for a higher rule to always remember Krishna and never forget Krishna. That's the devotees, right? But your question is nice, is that can Krishna break a lesser rule for a higher rule? That's your question, right? Yes or no?
That's my right. Because they are telling Krishna is not fair.
Yes. Nice question. I'll answer it now. I'll answer it. Definitely. I'll answer it. Yeah. See, Krishna is very naughty. He is the origin of being naughty and tricky. And Krishna is the original cheater. Original cheater. Nobody can cheat Krishna. See? So therefore, the verse says, Dharmam tu shakshat bhagavat pranitam. In other words, all rules and regulations come from Krishna, right? In the form of Bhagavad Gita, in the form of Mahabharata, in the form of Ramayana, in the form of the Upanishads, in the form of the Puranas and Srimad Bhagavatam, in the form of Chaitanya Charitamrita, all rules and regulations come from Krishna. But Krishna is above all rules and regulations. Are we okay so far? Ram Gopinath is above all rules and regulations. Why? Because Krishna can do anything he wants, with whomever he wants, however he wants, and whenever he wants. Okay? This is Krishna's supremely independent nature. That makes him the Supreme Personality of Godhead. See? We okay?
Yeah, Maharaj.
Mare Krishna Rake Ke. Rake Krishna Mare Ke. If Krishna wants to kill someone, nobody can stop him. Whether he's following the Kshatriya codes of law or not. And if Krishna wants to save somebody, nobody can kill that person. That is the absolute nature of Krishna. And that's the absolute nature of our consciousness of Krishna. So I shall give you one example. I shall give you one example. Srila Prabhupada, he met one very wealthy leading industrialist in Mumbai. And I'm not going to mention his name just to respect that person. And this wealthy leading industrialist in Mumbai, he had so much power and he had so much influence that anyone who is the Prime Minister of India, he controls. He doesn't care about voting. Whoever is in power, he controls. This is a very, very influential man, wealthy industrialist. I mean, in material terms, they may be powerful and wealthy. Otherwise, these persons are really worth nothing in that sense. Without Krishna consciousness, everything is zero. You put the one to many zeros, it becomes value. Prabhupada used to give that example. So this industrialist, he said the same thing about Krishna, Srila Prabhupada. Practically, he was offending. He was committing offenses to Krishna's lotus feet. And one of the things he said, that, this Krishna is like a big cheetah, So Prabhupada asked him, how? He meets other men's wives in the dead of night. The gopis of Vrindavan were married. He meets other men's wives. How can he do that? How can he be beyond, dharma? How can he not follow dharma? See? And Srila Prabhupada was getting angry with him. And Srila Prabhupada, because you get angry when you blaspheme Krishna. You get angry when you blaspheme Krishna's devotees. It's part of transcendental consciousness, that type of anger, which we discussed in text number 1. Like how Mahaprabhu, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu got angry at Madai. Krishna spoke the Bhagavad Gita to make Arjuna angry to fight. Hanuman got angry, but the whole of Lanka. So we discussed this in text number 1. So Srila Prabhupada, he responded to this person because he was getting angry. And it was all happening in Hindi. And as I heard it, it was happening in Hindi. So Srila Prabhupada said, because Srila Prabhupada also broke the rule of being, social, cordial, ethical, and moral. He broke the rule. Immediately he broke the rule. He asked this man, who is that woman next to you? Now, this man was a highly cultured man. He may have been like following an impersonalist or Mayavadi, but he was a cultured man. And the man was shocked by Srila Prabhupada. He says, Swamiji, how can you ask such a question? Because in India, the culture is that, you don't ask a cultured person, who is that woman standing next to you, or sitting next to you, or with you. You don't ask such a question, because such a question offends the person. And in very high culture, especially in Indian culture or Vedic culture, anyone can understand that any woman who's next to you is either your grandmother, your mother, or your wife, or your daughter. And that's okay. If it's your grandmother, your mother, your wife, or your daughter next to you, no issues. But nobody questions who is this lady or who is this woman. So the man was shocked at Prabhupada's response. Then Prabhupada said, answer. But Swamiji, how can you ask such a question? Can't you see this is my wife? Said Prabhupada said, I didn't know, I needed to know. Now that is your wife. Okay, fine. And Prabhupada said, I'm answering your question with another question. For how long she'll be your wife? And that's another thing. You don't ask a person, okay, this is my wife, but for how long will she be your wife? You're really insulting this person. Prabhupada was angry. Prabhupada said, answer. The man, he said, Swamiji, I don't know. And for how long she was your wife? And he said, well, we married that time, and now we have children, we have parents. And he was not, by this time, he was a little bit submissive. Prabhupada said, okay, she's your wife for 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. And then after that, she's no more your wife. Why have you stolen her from Krishna and made her your wife? You are saying that Krishna is stealing other people's wives and meeting them in the dead of night? Yes, that is a fact. But you have become Krishna. You have taken the place of Krishna. And you have taken this woman as your wife just for 30, 40, 50 years, and you're criticizing Krishna? So Krishna will come and take your wife as his own at the time of her death. And you'll have no more this wife. And therefore Srila Prabhupada said, everything and everyone belongs to Krishna for his pleasure, not for your pleasure. So therefore it is most important to understand Krishna's absolute position. Most important to understand Krishna's absolute position. We cannot reckon with that in the ultimate sense of Krishna consciousness. Okay, I guess we will sort of wind up for today with this last, anecdote of Prabhupada that I've just spoken about. And we look forward to a nice association again tomorrow to continue some last discussions about this important aspect of Niyamagraha. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada ki. Srila Rupa Goswami Prabhupada ki. Ananta Koti Vaishnav Vrinda ki. Nectar of instruction ki. Shri Bhakti Rasamrita. She's Upadeshamrita ki. Nitai Go Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you, Maharaj.
You're welcome.